On the 28th of February 2026, the United States and Israel launched large-scale strikes on Iran. The attacks targeted Iranian military and nuclear facilities and assassinated Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Iran responded with missile and drone attacks targeting US bases and American allies across West Asia. Then came one of the biggest turning points of the war. Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most important oil shipping routes. The move disrupted global energy supplies and sent oil markets into turmoil. As the war escalated, Washington demanded what it called Iran's unconditional surrender. The region moved closer to a direct and wider war. After weeks of strikes, threats, and global pressure, a temporary ceasefire was finally announced on the 8th of April. The deal linked the pause in fighting to the reopening of the strait, but even the ceasefire remained fragile. Fresh strikes, new threats, and continued standoffs keep the region on edge. The killing of Iran's supreme leader, the attacks on Gulf nations, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, and a fragile ceasefire. On WION Wide Angle, we take a look at the biggest moments that defined the US-Iran war. And what impact did it have on global politics, trade, and security? Let's decode.
A short time ago, the United States military began major combat operations in Iran. Our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime, a vicious group of very hard, terrible people. Its menacing activities directly endanger the United States, our troops, our bases overseas, and our allies throughout the world. Finally, to the great, proud people of Iran, I say tonight that the hour of your freedom is at hand.
On the morning of the 28th of February 2026, the United States and Israel launched their biggest joint military operation against Iran in decades. The operation began with a massive wave of airstrikes targeting Iranian military bases, missile sites, air defense systems, and command centers across the country. According to US officials, nearly 900 strikes were carried out in the first 12 hours of the operation. Israel said more than 1,200 bombs were used during the first day of attacks. The strikes hit multiple cities, including Tehran, Isfahan, Bushehr, Bandar Abbas, and other strategic locations. But the main target of the opening strikes was Iran's top leadership. US and Israeli officials later said the timing of the operation was specifically linked to the movement of Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Khamenei was killed along with 7 members of the top Iranian security leadership who had gathered at several locations in Tehran, and about a dozen members of his family and close entourage near simultaneous strikes within 60 seconds. 40 other senior Iranian leaders also died in the attack. Among them were IRGC commander Mohammad Pakpour, Iranian Defense Minister Aziz Naziradeh, and multiple senior members of Iran's security establishment. Khamenei's compound in Tehran was directly targeted during the first wave of strikes. Satellite images later showed heavy damage to the area. The same day, Donald Trump announced that Khamenei had been killed in a social media post. Iranian state media confirmed his death hours later on March 1st.
Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. ملت بزرگ ایران، روح بلند پیشوای ملت بزرگ ایران و پیشقراول امت اسلامی حضرت امام خامنه ای با نوشیدن شهد گوارای شهادت در ماه مبارک رمضان به ملکوت اعلا پیوست.
As the strikes continued, communication networks across parts of Iran were disrupted. Tehran reported major internet outages while videos of explosions and air defense fire emerged across social media. The attacks also caused civilian casualties. Within hours of the strikes, Iran accused the United States and Israel of declaring war. Iranian missiles and drones were then launched towards US targets and American allies in the region, marking the beginning of the US-Iran war. On the 28th of February, just hours after the US-Israel offensive against Iran began, one of the deadliest incidents was reported in the southern Iranian city of Minab. A missile strike hit the Shayare Tayyebe Girls' School during school hours, when students and teachers were inside the building. Iranian authorities said that the US missile strike killed more than 160 people, most of them schoolgirls between the ages of 7 and 12. Teachers, parents, and school staff were also among the dead. The school was located near an IRGC naval facility in Minab. Satellite images later showed multiple impact sites around both the school and the nearby military complex. Initial reports did not confirm who carried out the strikes, but within days, US officials said a preliminary military investigation indicated that American forces were likely responsible. Multiple reports said the strike may have been caused by outdated targeting intelligence, which incorrectly identified the area as part of an active Iranian military site. The United States said it does not deliberately target civilian infrastructure and confirmed that an internal investigation had been launched. On the 19th of May, U.S. Admiral Brad Cooper testified before Congress and said that the U.S. military investigation into the blast is complex, given that it was located on an active Iranian cruise missile site.
Can you at this moment acknowledge that that mistake was made and that we were responsible for it? It's something we didn't want to do and don't want to repeat?
Sir, it's a complex investigation. The school itself is located on an active IRGC cruise missile base.
Absolutely.
It's more complex than the average strike. As soon as we're complete, I'm fully committed to transparency, given your important oversight role and the other members here.
Just one day after the United States and Israel launched their opening strikes on Iran, Tehran began its largest ever retaliatory operation across West Asia. Iran launched waves of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones targeting US military bases, diplomatic facilities, airports, and energy infrastructure across the region. The attacks targeted countries hosting American forces, including Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Jordan. Sirens were activated across multiple Gulf cities as air defense systems intercepted missiles and drones. The Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the U.S. naval support activity in Bahrain, and Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia were among the key targets. The United Arab Emirates said more than 1,000 Iranian drones and over 200 missiles had targeted its territory during the first week of the war. Bahrain reported intercepting dozens of missiles and drones headed towards it. Several missiles and drones were intercepted, but some projectiles breached air defenses, causing fires, infrastructure damage, and casualties. And this visual caught everyone's attention. Parts of a drone crashed near Dubai International Airport, forced temporary flight suspensions. The Pentagon later confirmed that US troops had been killed in the Gulf region and injured in the initial waves of attacks. By the 7th of March, the number of US military fatalities from Iranian strikes had risen to 7. Iran also warned that any country allowing its airspace or military facilities to be used against it would be considered a legitimate target. Multiple countries across West Asia were directly drawn into the war. On the 2nd of March 2026, the conflict expanded further as Hezbollah officially entered the Iran war. The Lebanon-based group announced that it was launching what it called a coordinated resistance response following the assassination of Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and the continued US-Israeli strikes on Iran. Within hours, Hezbollah fired hundreds of rockets, missiles and drones towards northern Israel. Targets included military bases, air defense positions, border outposts and cities in the Galilee region. The Israeli military responded with large-scale airstrikes across southern Lebanon and the Bekaa Valley. Lebanon's health ministry said the initial wave of Israeli strikes killed more than 300 people, including civilians. Thousands of residents in southern Lebanon were forced to flee their homes as the bombardment continued. On the 2nd of March 2026, Iran officially closed the Strait of Hormuz to what it called unfriendly nations. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the world's most important maritime choke points. Nearly 20% of global oil trade and a quarter of the world's LNG shipments pass through the narrow waterway every day. Even before the official announcement, the IRGC had begun warning ships through radio transmissions that no ship is allowed to pass the Strait of Hormuz. Multiple commercial vessels turned back while others remained anchored outside the strait, waiting for security clearance. Several shipping companies immediately suspended operations through the region. Iranian naval forces and IRGC speedboats were deployed across key parts of the strait, as Tehran warned that any ship linked to the United States or its allies should be targeted. 3 commercial vessels were reportedly hit during the early days of the blockade, and at least 1 seafarer was killed in a drone attack near the shipping channel. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz quickly turned the US-Iran war into a global economic crisis. The strait handles nearly 1/5 of the world's oil trade and is a major route for liquefied natural gas exports from the Gulf region. With shipping disrupted, global energy markets were hit almost immediately. Within hours of the closure, global oil prices surged to their highest levels in years. Brent crude crossed $150 per barrel as markets feared a long-term supply shock. Countries heavily dependent on Gulf energy imports, including India, China, Japan and South Korea, began activating emergency energy response plans. Shipping and insurance costs also rose sharply. The disruption also impacted global supply chains. Tankers were forced to take longer routes around Africa, delaying energy supplies and increasing transportation costs worldwide. Stock markets across Asia, Europe and the United States fell sharply in the days after the closure. Airlines warned of higher fuel costs, while several countries expressed concern over rising inflation and energy shortages.
The stock market is at an all-time high, and America's growth has not stumbled. And that's largely due to artificial intelligence and this real creativity of people are investing like mad in this new industry. But at the same time, the average American who's not in the stock market, and that's over 50% of Americans, are hurting very badly. Groceries are much higher, and of course, gasoline at the pump is higher. But all of this is going to have an increasing effect.
9 days after the start of the US-Iran war, Iran announced its new supreme leader. On the 8th of March 2026, Iran's Assembly of Experts officially named Mojtaba Khamenei as the country's third supreme leader, replacing his father, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The decision was made after days of closed-door meetings between Iran's senior clerics, political leaders and the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. Under Iran's constitution, the Assembly of Experts is responsible for choosing the supreme leader. Following Khamenei's death, an interim leadership council was formed to temporarily take over state functions until a successor was selected. Even after becoming supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei remains largely out of public view due to security concerns. Iranian officials say that he is operating through a secure channel. By the fourth week, the US-Iran war had moved far beyond missiles, drones, and airstrikes. On March 26, 2026, day 27 of the war, the United States, Iran, and their allies were engaged in a large-scale cyber conflict targeting critical infrastructure, financial networks, energy systems, and communication platforms. US officials said Iranian state-linked hacking groups had targeted American banks, energy companies, transport networks, and government websites. Several US state government portals experienced temporary outages. One of the biggest attacks targeted energy control networks linked to oil terminals in the Gulf region. The United States responded with its own cyber operations. American officials did not publicly confirm details, but multiple reports said US Cyber Command targeted Iranian military communication, radar networks, air defense systems, and banking infrastructure. The United Nations warned that the conflict was creating a dangerous precedent for cyber warfare as digital attacks began impacting civilian services and global economic systems. On the 7th of April 2026, US President Donald Trump issued one of his strongest warnings since the start of the war. In a post on Truth Social, Trump wrote, "A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again." He added, "I don't want that to happen, but it probably will." The warning came hours before a deadline set by the United States for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and return to negotiations. The White House said the US was prepared to launch large-scale strikes on Iranian infrastructure if no agreement was reached. American officials said potential targets included transport links, energy facilities, and command centers connected to Iran's war operations. The comments quickly triggered global reaction. Iran condemned the statement, calling it a threat against a sovereign nation and accusing Washington of escalating the war through public intimidation.
2 days, the President of the United States again resorted to language that is not only deeply irresponsible but profoundly alarming, declaring that, quote, "the whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back," unquote. It is regrettable and alarming that while in full view of international community, the President of the United States shamelessly and brazenly issues threats to destroy all civilian infrastructure in Iran.
The first formal ceasefire of the conflict came into effect after days of intense diplomatic negotiations. The agreement followed back-channel talks involving the United States, Iran, Pakistan, Qatar, Oman, and other regional mediators. Under the agreement, the United States paused major airstrikes inside Iran, while Iran agreed to reduce missile and drone attacks targeting US forces and allies across West Asia. The deal also included steps towards reopening the Strait of Hormuz, but it continues to face disruption. This temporary agreement was subsequently extended indefinitely by President Donald Trump. However, the ceasefire has remained fragile from the very beginning. On the 11th and 12th of April 2026, day 44 of the US-Iran war, high-level diplomatic talks between the United States and Iran began in Islamabad, Pakistan. The meeting was the first direct peace initiative since the start of the war, following the temporary ceasefire that came into effect on April 8th. The main focus of the discussions was the future of the Strait of Hormuz, the continuation of the ceasefire, and conditions for a longer-term de-escalation agreement. The United States demanded full freedom of navigation through the strait and an end to Iranian missile and drone attacks, and security guarantees for U.S. forces and allies in the region. Iran, on the other hand, called for a complete end to U.S. airstrikes, the removal of naval restrictions near Iranian ports, and guarantees that further attacks on Iranian leadership would not take place. While the talks did not produce a final agreement, both sides agreed to continue the ceasefire and maintain open diplomatic channels.
We have been at it now for 21 hours, and we've had a number of substantive discussions with the Iranians. That's the good news. The bad news is that we have not reached an agreement, and I think that's bad news for Iran much more than it's bad news for the United States of America. So we go back to the United States having not come to an agreement.
On the 4th of May, the United States officially launched Project Freedom, a major military and naval operation aimed at restoring full shipping access through the Strait of Hormuz. U.S. Central Command said Project Freedom would involve naval escort missions, mine clearance operations, air surveillance, and the protection of commercial shipping moving through the strait. The United States deployed additional warships, destroyers, surveillance aircraft, and drone systems across the Gulf region as part of the operation. U.S. Navy ships began escorting oil tankers and commercial vessels through key shipping lanes inside the Strait of Hormuz. The Pentagon said the operation's main objective was to ensure freedom of navigation and prevent further disruption to global energy supplies. However, on the 5th of May 2026, just one day after the operation began, U.S. President Donald Trump announced that Project Freedom would be temporarily put on hold. The decision came as diplomatic efforts continued and after reports of possible progress towards a broader U.S.-Iran agreement. On the 25th of May, the United States launched new strikes on targets in southern Iran, despite the fragile ceasefire and continuing peace talks between Washington and Tehran. U.S. Central Command said the strikes were self-defense operations aimed at protecting American forces and commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. Reports said explosions were heard near Bandar Abbas and other strategic locations along Iran's southern coast. The Pentagon said the operation was limited and defensive and insisted that the ceasefire remained in effect. Iran condemned the strikes, calling them a violation of the April ceasefire agreement and an act of bad faith during ongoing negotiations. The strikes took place as Iranian negotiators were in Qatar for new talks aimed at extending the ceasefire and reaching a longer-term agreement with the United States. 3 months later, the US-Iran war continues to cast a shadow across West Asia and the world. It has become one of the most defining global conflicts in recent times. Disrupted global energy supplies and their cascading effects can be seen in every corner of the world. The ceasefire continues, but it remains fragile, and the region remains on edge.